people need absolutely perfect looking lawns, not unlike to some degree, the greens on golf courses. And let's sell this stuff to people in large amounts. And they were very successful at creating a problem that didn't really need a solution and going from there. I mean, I've never applied pesticides as long as I lived most of my life abroad in Europe and also here, of course, and I've never applied pesticides at all anywhere, herbicides. I just cut the weeds. I don't care. It looks okay once it's cut. Anyhow, this is what other folks are doing, and it's all the more frustrating for those of you, I'm sure, who are environmentally focused. I'm going to drive toward a particular point now about how I think everyone, and in particular underserved communities, communities of color, can be better empowered one way, and one we think is an important way, because we're mostly flying blind. Yes, there is a lot of new research coming out, but this research is essentially a snapshot of a point in time. A researcher sets up some testing stations on the Potomac and finds that in 100% of the samples taken, this was back in 2004, I think, they found accuracy in significant quantities in the watershed. But that was a snapshot in time. We don't know what's happened to some degree. We don't know what's happened since. We don't know what happened before. And there's another issue, which is that of spikes in exposure to pesticides. Every spring and late winter, this stuff is applied to agricultural fields all over the place. And every spring, people are putting this stuff all over their lawns. And then what happens in the spring? It rains, and sometimes it rains very heavily. And if the rain is particularly ill-timed, as it often is, by the way, more often than not, this stuff runs right off the fields, runs right off your lawns, runs right into your watershed, okay? And to the extent that it sinks into the ground and into groundwater, then it's getting into that too. And what we've seen are significant spikes where testing for it has been done, and there is an emerging body of research linking those periods of spikes to birth defects, well, spikes to exposure to women who are conceiving or who are already pregnant and giving birth to children with severe gastrointestinal disorders. What we're talking about is babies being born with their stomachs outside their body, with their intestines being born outside the body. Think about the chances of survival. Not very good. Spikes also have can also cause other things. That's one of the pieces of research that we've seen. So what we think we need to get past just these snapshots and to empower us with information is a mandatory system of pesticide usage reporting, which is a piece of legislation we've been fighting for in the Maryland legislature for several years. We are more confident this year than in last year's. And what will this allow us to do? It's going to allow us to link pesticide use, pesticide application to clusters of various kinds of disorders. Without this kind of information, government agencies, health professionals simply cannot assess pesticide impact on the environment. In our project, we've got a group that has developed a methodology for assessing, number one, data gaps. That is stuff where they just basically don't have the information. They're concerned, but they don't have the information about a particular pesticide. And also where they've got information to be able to say this compound of concern is a priority, this compound of concern is maybe a slightly lesser priority, etc. But the biggest single concern they've got are the data gaps. And the most important finding from basically about 3 years of work that this research group has done, from scientists across the environmental spectrum within federal and Maryland state agencies, is that we've got these serious data gaps we've got to deal with. Something is not working well on this slide. What are the benefits of the system? Let me go to my printout and maybe I can read it to you. Basically, I'll just talk about it. The system is going to be funded by an increase in product registration fees that manufacturers pay. Whenever a manufacturer wants to sell a product, a pesticide, herbicide in any particular state, including Maryland, they have to pay a fee. Those fees are extraordinarily low, by the way. They have to pay them usually annually. Some states it's every 2 years. Maryland's fees are a bit below the average for the North Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic and Northeast states. You will hear from the other side, it's going to raise your costs of these stuff. Well, first of all, I don't really care, but that's completely untrue. And you know why? Because, you'll be really shocked by this, go on Amazon.com and type in the name of your favorite pesticide. Roundup, okay? It's glyphosate, it's really bad stuff. And you type it in, you can order it online. It is nationally priced on a uniform basis. Do you think they're paying, that the manufacturers and the manufacturers' marketing firms are paying the least bit of attention to the product registration fees? They're not. They're simply not paying attention to that. Because they can register glyphosate, or Roundup that is, in Maryland for, I think it's $100 for 1 year. $100 to sell glyphosate to the entire state of Maryland. Does that, do you think that has any impact on their bottom line sales, and it's going to cause them to increase the cost? Of course not. So sales are being driven nationwide. They're being driven now online. Unfortunately, your friendly Amazon is partnering heavily with pesticide marketing representative companies to sell you all this stuff nationally on a highly uniform basis. And we've done extensive research into this. The prices are simply not affected. You look at the cost of this stuff in Maine, you look at the cost of it in Maryland or Virginia or Delaware or West Virginia, any of the watershed states, as well as states outside the watershed, it's all the same. The prices are all the same. Shipping costs will vary, of course. But the price of the chemical, given that you're ordering a similar quantity, is all the same. Oh, I see what happened. This thing is doing this. So, there we go. It's meant to be, by the way, a web-based reporting system for, by the way, farmers and applicators, and especially applicators, because most farmers don't do their own applications. Applicators have to keep this information. It's required under state law, but guess what? They're asked to keep it on paper, and there's no centralized reporting system. I mean, I have a theory about all this, more than theory, which is from the standpoint of the Farm Bureau, from the standpoint of the chemical manufacturers, ignorance is bliss. They don't want you to know where this stuff is going, what it's potentially doing. They don't want you to be able to link it up to clusters. California is probably the only state that has a really heavy, pretty aggressive uniform system, and groups, in particular community groups, are able to do a lot with this. And why can't we go any further?
As you do that, we're coming almost to the formal,
just about that.
the formal time plan, but I'm asking that audience possibly stay a little longer. We have a break and then lunch, so we got a little.
I'm going to wrap up in about a minute or two. These are the kind of things that this sort of centralized reporting system will be able to give us. But in particular, what I really want to kind of compare it to is the community right to know law that a lot of you are familiar with. This is a law that goes back to 1986. And it empowered communities, and particularly underserved communities, which oftentimes are located near these kinds of plants, to be able to get information on what the world is being released by this stuff into the air and into the water and into the ground. And it has caused, we know, in lots of places, significant reductions in uses of toxic substances. Pesticides are an equal or greater threat. They're more ubiquitous. And if you want more information about this kind of legislation, this is what we're working on. Contact Ruth Berlin, who's my boss on this project. She's the executive director of Maryland Pesticide Network, as well as Andy Galley at Clean Water Action. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, particularly. I'm sorry that you felt rushed there, but I think you provided quite a bit of information. We talked initially with Fred talking about the applied there, the importance of place, and some of how that affects different communities and how people are engaged. We also talked about nutrient trading, and some cases one community is traded off for another community in the process. True EJ issue. We talked about stewardship and trying to engage people not only on an environmental basis but on a moral basis to do something about the issues that were outlined today. And Roger just discussed the issues about pesticides and how pervasive they are in things that we wouldn't even think they're in, like cosmetics and stuff of that nature. So we've got our work cut out for us, and I'm going to shut up. And if you have any questions for the panelists, please, just put them out there right now.
I have a question for Fred. So I was really interested in how you were talking about changing the message, what different things mean to, say, there's a lot of talk about access. And particularly, I work with the National Parks, so the National Park Service, part of executive order is creating creative new access sites by 2025, so that's a big part. And I've been going around, and access means a lot of different things to a lot of people. When I go to Annapolis, it's like, oh, I should have a place to launch my sailboat every 2 miles, that's access. But then to another community, what do you view as like an important part of water access to places that people, to connect people with nature and communities that might not be served right now?
Yeah, and being no expert on this by any stretch, to me, access is even more fundamental. Access is where you feel welcome. And I know before I was a river teacher, oddly enough, I never felt welcome at the Bernie Fowler wait-ins. I always thought it was like a family thing. You had to be invited. It wasn't a place where I felt embraced. So I think proximity has something to do with that too. What's close to you. I don't think people are going to drive all the way from the Western Shore to Blackwater necessarily. They want access or need access in the places where it can be found more readily. It may seem like a cheap shot, but I won't point out that the largest bay preservation organization in the area operates from a private gate beach. To me, that sends a real message about where you're welcome and where you're not, and who you're serving and who you're not. So I do think that access is a little bigger than where the gate is and who has the combination, and it's that overall fog of where you feel embraced and where you feel you're comfortable. For me, growing up, it was across the road, but I couldn't get there because the 4-Hers had that locked up as a private club. So it just depends. It's relative. I think that's the short answer. Would anyone disagree with that? I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to get an idea about it.
Can I follow on that question for Fred? I think there are going to be really practical reasons for environmental groups to be more and more concerned about what racial minorities think based on the changing demographics in the United States. I'm from Virginia, and I've watched the Virginia Outdoors Demand Survey report that the changing demographics are really affecting the use of outdoor space. Are there networks, professional networks, like where is this work that you're talking about that was so interesting and seems so vital taking place in the environmental community? Or isn't it taking place in the environmental community right now?
Again, I think it's situational. I went to the Black Environmental Thought Conference 2 months ago in the University of Minnesota, of all places, Minnesota before. I was stunned to find people from so many different walks, so many different ethnic and other walks of life, all working on environmental stuff that I've never seen in the Bay community. Like, who are these people and where have they been and how can we find them? My sense is that the Bay thing is I don't want to say clique because that's something I'm marginalizing. It's a subset of the overall environmental community. And there are lots of subsets around. There are people working on pesticides, and there are people doing environmental justice work. Since I've started doing more of this environmental justice work, I'm meeting more people who are just doing that. And they don't even know who the Bay people are. It's like, who are those people? I talk about these various funding establishments, other stuff, and they're like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of those people. They're just operating in different classes. I think that's the story.
Because of the way that the movement was given rise, like the history.
Yes, and I will say that I believe that powerful ideas are just as much as important as powerful funders. And I think the message, the story of environmental justice is a powerful idea. It's compelling. It's a great, hell of a great story. And we're not harnessing that. So you're right, there's some practical reasons why if we're serious about cleaning up the planet, cleaning up the Bay, we need that mass. We need that mass of people, not only to be inclusive, but to be authentic, to be for real. Otherwise, we're kidding ourselves. We're not going to clean this up amongst ourselves. Are we for real? I mean, come on. So to me, you're right.
Well, you're cleaning it up at the expense of certain people who are vulnerable.
Which is the history of the world, right? And we're talking one-on-one, all right? This is not a new idea. No one's been in the Bay.
This question over here.
Well, it's not really a question. Actually, Potomac Conservancy is also another good resource or another good local organization that is doing great work in dealing with cleaning up the Bay and the costume. Clean Water Action. There's also Clean Water Network, are also two good national organizations that's working on these issues. And then a lot of national environmental organizations specifically are working on clean water issues and water in the U.S. So
I would also say that the Sierra Club's Environmental Justice and Community Partnerships Program, of which Irv Sheffy is a great resource as well. He's not going to choose his own horn. And so I'll choose
Environmental
this guy,
Justice and Community
this guy.
Partnerships Program.
Thank you.
We had a question here and a question over here.
My question, you're talking to me.
Yeah.
Questions for Michelle. You know, for a long time we've been looking into pollution trade and the problems, usually very philosophical, or looking at water quality impacts. How much have you been able to look into the way that, you know, assuming trade goes forward, the way that information about trading is going to be dispersed to people, and how accessible it's going to be, and how, you know, I mean, I think, you know, I won't hide the ball here. I already feel pretty intimidated by the complexity and the technicality of trade issues, and I think, you know, if someone's just an ordinary person, you know, folks in their homes are faced with a proposed trade. How are they going to even get information? And, you know, has that issue been, you know, dealt with at all yet, or are people still just trying to figure out how to really
Yeah, no. And I should mention the other person from Earth Justice do and doing a lot of great day work as well, so she's a great resource for people. I mean, the transparency issues are really important. I mean, for starters, these contracts between the two pollution sources are private, so they're what called third-party aggregators coming in to do the deal, like the citizens, the communities, the public's not at the table for those deals. The primary credit generators are the ag community that I mentioned. The agricultural community they're the #1 source of water quality impairment in the Bay and nationwide. And yet there's been really a lot of political resistance to regulating that community. And so there's been voluntary after voluntary program tried in the Bay that's failed over the last decade. This is yet another voluntary program. The way they'll contemplate things is best standard practices, and many of these practices that are based even on, they'll say this in literature, verified science. There's no resources or interest on the part of the agency to verify that you're getting the actual reductions that you're going to be getting. There's no way for the public to get the information necessary to know if you're getting those pollution sources reductions. And even on the point source side, power plants, refineries, traditional permitted sources where, in theory, you can go to the file and get information about their particular limits and how much they're discharging and whether they're violating those limits. You know, the agencies, when you talk about, well, how is people going to get information there? Doesn't this private transaction really need to be part of this permit in a way where people can know what's happening, where the credits are coming from, be able to verify that they're actually getting their load reductions, etc. And they don't really have good answers for that. I mean, even in the GenOn context, where right now the proposed permit modification is, they've got trading between two of the power plants themselves, and that's not enough to generate enough credits for all three, so they're going to go outside the plants. And we've been looking at Tina Miners right here, the Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper, formerly at the Maryland Environmental Law Clinic, did yeoman's work in trying to parse through these permits to figure out even how these trades are happening, and she's pretty
How would a
sophisticated.
regular person figure that
She's
out?
a
How would
pretty
even the
sophisticated
agency figure
lawyer.
that
I
out?
mean, and I was going back and looking at this recently, and it's so impossible to even figure out because they're allowing credits for where there are violations. I mean, it was nearly impossible to figure out sort of how these transactions are even taking place. We know the agencies don't have the resources now to do the job that they're doing. We've got citizen provisions in our laws that allow citizens to step in the shoes of government to take on polluters, but if you don't have information, there's no transparency, there's no way you can even do that. And the information that you're provided is sort of all over the place. So lack of transparency, whether it's verifying credits, whether it's allowing communities to know what's going on, I mean, it's just not there. And it's an issue people are talking about, and it's like on the table, but there's not been any real progress, I think. And I don't know, Bob, you're really involved in trading in Maryland too. There's not been progress made, you know, in terms of that issue. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem that people should be talking about. And, you know, it shouldn't be going on anyway, but it certainly shouldn't be going on at all if no one can participate in the process and have a voice and have information that they need to protect themselves.
It's 11:40, and I'm going to just ask for about the next 5 minutes, those who want to go to the ballroom for lunch, you may want to go ahead. Don't feel shy if you have to dip out. But there was a question, Maria.
Yeah, I just had a comment and a question. So, Fred, I think you made a good point about changing the messaging. I work as an independent consultant in the Bay Watershed, and one of the things we do is take kids out on stream studies. And this year we worked with all Title I schools in Montgomery County. We asked the kids, how many of you have ever seen the Bay? And I can tell you, it's uniformly 60 to 75% have never seen the Bay. So we don't focus on the Save the Bay message, and most of them, we take them from their school into their local streams, and what they really care about is picking up the trash from their local streams. So I think you're right that part of that messaging is, and I personally feel like access to the Bay is like, it's really hard to get down to the water in the Bay. So it's something, it's really hard to kind of want people to do that. But my question kind of for the whole panel is around, and picking up on Fred's comment, like about these public-private partnerships, how do we drive the funding for programs? And I guess part of the question is, so you mentioned that about the conflict of interest. What about the utility of using things like the plastic bag fee, the plastic bag bill, to both drive down a consumer behavior that is directly harmful to the environment, but that may put a cost directly onto the consumer and disproportionately onto disadvantaged communities? Dottie, you spoke a little bit about what you did in those communities, and do you think that's an effective way of doing things? And Rob, you also spoke about this a little bit in terms of the increased fee to the pesticides. So what's the mechanism for generating this money in terms of not raising federal or local taxes to provide money for program funding?
It's something I'm struggling with, but I'll tell you what galls me. When I was an activist, before I was a riverkeeper, there was no expectation that I would get paid or have benefits. The moment the environmental community begins to focus on how to pay itself, it starts to make very fundamentally different decisions about what constitutes a good program and what's a good move. What I hear in the General Assembly amongst environmentalists a lot is we did something that was pragmatic, which sometimes means this was good for us as much as it was good for the environment. So I think we have to separate the question of what communities need from who's going to pay us to work on what these communities need. They're really separate questions. If we expect the 1% funders to pay us to deal with the needs of grassroots communities, we're screwed. Because they don't care about the same stuff we care about at all. So we do have a conflict, and it's a fundamental conflict. It's not just how we spin the issue, it's how do we do it. I think the way to do this is empower these communities. Right? The stuff that we do to get paid is probably going to be very different. And I assure you, grassroots organizations are working on different problems than paid environmentalists. They're doing very different work, fundamentally different work. And I just think we have to be own up to it. Hey, those guys are doing stuff we can't do. We can't get funded to do it. We can't work on it. But maybe there's some way we can Me Too, or support their efforts, or give them access to information that we have a particular access to. That's just what I think, but it changes every day. I'm trying to find that answer myself. I'd like to get paid, generally speaking.
I would add that there is a growing trend among the family trust and the small foundations that fund this kind of work into really demanding that the proposals that come in front of them, many of them from traditional environmental organizations, are strongly grassroots based. You may want to know about this, and we've seen this trend greatly intensify in the last 7 or 8 years in this area. I can't speak to other parts of the country, but certainly in the Chesapeake Bay region.
But it's not invisible to them. I mean, that's the brick wall, I think. They think it's not programmatic. How many times have funders said to me, this grassroots stuff isn't in me? It's not. We're
actually doing the opposite.
Really?
And they're actually pushing us to make in the other direction. Some funders, but they happen to be all the ones we deal with, which is a fairly broad group, mostly Baltimore-based.
Okay. We have one final question. I know this might not answer all the questions, but we have one final question here.
Yes, I'm Richard Allen. I'm the Director of Equal Opportunity at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. I just wanted to ask the panelists, how do you feel about how we, Maryland DNR, work with you and your respective different programs and different issues that you're working on?
I get more support from DNR than I do from the waterkeepers. Seriously. They're all over our stuff. They help us. They think they're throwing us bones. They're helping us get stuff done. They're hardworking. I mean, no kidding. But, granted, sometimes we're on the opposite end of the legislature, but the grassroots workers in DNR is what I'm talking about.
We work really well here, and the folks there are doing as much as they can to support what we do. And I would add, Fred, the issue of the legislature is we actually think the problem is with the legislative leadership. If stuff could get to floor votes, we believe there would be a very different result, including on our legislature. We know we have the votes to pass the legislation. it can't get past the leadership. It's never been allowed to get out of committee yet. And we know what happened because we believe that and that's classically the way that big money lobbyists like the Farm Bureau stop things from happening, which is they own the key folks on the committees and or the House and Senate leadership. But getting back to DNR, that's a different issue. I mean, they're not involved in those politics, of course, but they're as supportive as they can within the constraints of the law and what they have to do.
There's a different relationship with MDE.
MDE?
Yes.
It's still fairly good for us. We have a very different relationship with NDA. Okay. Which is basically, in the pocket of the Farm Bureau. Right.
And explain your acronyms in case there's folks who aren't informed.
Maryland Department of the Environment,
Oh, sorry.
and Maryland Department of Agriculture, and Maryland Department of Natural Resources.
Well, with that said, I want to thank everybody for coming out to this particular session, and please give an applause to our panelists. Solution sessions this afternoon. In the meantime, talk to your neighbors, get to know who's in the room as you go to lunch in the ballroom. I believe it's on this floor.
Yeah, the ballroom, you go down to towards the left, and then you go towards the right, towards like the elevator and the stairs. It's actually right over there. And then it's a little